The cantina's blue neon lights flickered through thick smoke as bottles clinked and alien voices mixed together in a dozen different languages. In the darkest corner, away from the main crowd, sat Vex Taylor, his massive Zephyrian frame hunched over a glass of something that glowed purple. 3 of his 6 tentacles were missing, replaced by crude mechanical prosthetics that sparked occasionally. His chitinous shell bore deep scars that told stories of battles fought and barely survived. Around his table sat 8 young recruits from across the galaxy. There was Crix, a bright-eyed Volthan whose blue skin still had that fresh from the academy glow. Next to him sat Gorpok, a towering Threnody whose forearms gestured excitedly as he bragged about his sharpshooting scores. The others were equally young, equally eager, equally stupid. "Come on, old man," Crix pressed, his voice high with excitement. "We ship out to the Terran border tomorrow. Command briefed us on the humans. They're primitives who've barely discovered spaceflight 50 years ago. No natural armor, no venom sacs, no telepathic abilities. Hell, they can't even breathe half the atmospheres in the galaxy without those clunky suits." Gorpok slammed his drink down, purple liquid sloshing. "Heard they don't even have proper claws. It's just these soft little appendages with tiny nails. How do they fight? How do they hunt?" The other recruits laughed, imagining these soft, weak creatures they'd be facing. Some made jokes about collecting human teeth as trophies. Others wondered if humans would even put up a fight or just surrender. Immediately, Vex Taylor's compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, slowly rotated to focus on the young soldiers. When he spoke, his voice sounded like metal grinding against stone. "Primitives." He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "That's what I thought too, 43 cycles ago." The laughter died around the table. Something in the old veteran's tone made the recruit's blood run cold. "I was squad leader then," Vex Taylor continued, his mechanical tentacles whirring softly. "Fresh promotion, full team of 12 elite Zephyrian shock troops. Best training the Coalition had to offer. We were assigned to capture an orbital mining platform around Kepler 7. Simple mission. Get in, secure the facility, take prisoners." He took a long drink, his throat working as he swallowed. "Intelligence said the platform had minimal security. Mostly civilian workers. Miners, engineers, maintenance crew. Easy pickings." Crix leaned forward eagerly. "So what happened? Did they surrender immediately?" "Surrender?" A stellar laugh was like breaking glass. "Kid, humans don't know what that word means?" The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if other patrons sensed the story coming and wanted to hear. "We breached the hull at 0300 station time. Perfect breach. Clean hole, no alarms triggered. My team moved through the corridors like ghosts. We were professionals." Vex Taylor's good tentacles traced patterns on the table. "The first 3 levels were empty. Too easy, I thought. Then we heard sounds from the maintenance level." "Sounds?" Gorpok asked. "Sparking. Someone was working despite the breach. We figured it was some dumb worker who hadn't noticed the invasion yet." Vex Taylor's scarred face twitched. "I sent Kexton and Morgul to investigate. They were my best close combat specialists." The recruits waited, hanging on every word. They never came back. The words hung in the air like smoke. Vex Taylor continued, his voice growing distant. "We found their equipment scattered in the maintenance shaft. Plasma rifles melted. Armor cut clean through. But no bodies. No blood. It was like they'd just... vanished." "What was down there?" whispered a young Centauri recruit whose name Vex Taylor had already forgotten. "Taman." The name came out like a curse. Just a human. 30 years old, according to the records we found later. Maintenance worker, level 3 certification. Married, 2 kids back on Earth. He was supposed to fix air recyclers and replace filter systems. Vex Taylor's mechanical tentacles clicked nervously. When we finally found him, he was crouched in a ventilation shaft with nothing but a plasma, torch, and a toolkit. This human, this primitive, had been hunting my elite soldiers through the maintenance tunnels like they were prey. One human against trained soldiers? Crix's voice cracked slightly. One human who knew every pipe, every vent, every maintenance access in that station. One human who understood that he wasn't going home to see his family unless he stopped us. Vextillar's eyes grew distant. That plasma torch? He'd modified it. Jury-rigged some kind of focusing system that turned it into a precision weapon. He'd cut through our armor like it was paper. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But it wasn't the weapon that terrified us. It was the way he used it. He'd strike from impossible angles, cut through support beams to create obstacles, even used the station's own systems against us. He turned off artificial gravity in sections, reversed airflow to create wind tunnels, rerouted power to electrify corridors. The worst part was the waiting. We'd sweep an area, declare it clear, then one of my soldiers would just disappear. Gone. Sometimes we'd hear a brief scream over the cum, then silence. Gorpak's 4 hands gripped his drink tightly. How many did he get? 6 of my 12 men. Squad. Elite soldiers with decades of training killed by a maintenance worker with a torch. Vextillar's mechanical tentacles sparked. By the time reinforcements arrived, we were huddled in the central hub, afraid to move, afraid to split up, afraid to even breathe too loudly. What happened to him, Taman? He vanished into the station's superstructure when the cavalry arrived. Never found him. But he left us a message. Vextillar's laugh was bitter. Scrawled on the wall in our own squad's biofluid, picked the wrong home to invade. The recruits sat in stunned silence. Around them, the cantina's noise seemed muted, as if the universe itself was listening. It was my first lesson about humans, Vextillar said, finishing his drink. They're not warriors by nature. They're not predators. They're survivors. And when you threaten their survival, when you threaten their families, their homes, their way of life, he stood slowly, his damaged body creaking. They become something else entirely. As he limped away from the table, his final words followed him. Sleep well tonight, younglings. Tomorrow you'll learn whether you're ready to face what desperation can turn a human in two. The recruits stared at their drinks, no longer eager for glory, no longer certain that humans were the easy prey they'd been promised. Outside the cantina's windows, the stars seemed colder, and somewhere among them, humanity waited. The recruits had barely recovered from the first story when Vextillar settled back into his chair. His mechanical tentacles whirred softly as he reached for another drink. The purple liquid seemed to glow brighter in the dim cantina light. 6 months after the Kepler 7 incident, High Command decided I needed redemption, Vextillar began, his compound eyes reflecting the neon lights. They gave me a new squad, fresh recruits mostly, and a mission that was supposed to be foolproof. Crix shifted nervously in his seat. What kind of mission? Titan Base. A mining facility in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The brass called it Operation Swift Strike. Vextillar's voice carried the weight of old memories. Intelligence reports said it was lightly defended. Maybe 50 humans total, mostly civilian miners and engineers. The facility was extracting rare minerals that the Coalition needed for our war effort. He paused to take a drink, his throat working as he swallowed. The plan was simple. Drop in fast, secure the facility, take the humans prisoner, and ship the resources back to Coalition space. Command estimated the entire operation would take 6 hours. Clean, efficient, minimal casualties. Gorpak leaned forward. It sounds straightforward. What went wrong? Everything. Vextillar's laugh was bitter. The facility commander was a human female named Hygiene. 42 years old, former Earth Defense Force, had served in the Proxima conflict before retiring to civilian life. Command's file on her was thin. No longer a threat, they said. I'm just a mining supervisor now. The veteran's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. The biggest intelligence failure in Coalition history. We approached. Titan base in stealth mode. 3 assault ships carrying 90 elite troops. The facility hung in space like a metal spider. All angles and industrial equipment. No defensive turrets visible. No military vessels in the area. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a civilian mining operation. Psst. Mechanical tentacles clicked against the table. Our first mistake was assuming Hyjin had gone soft. Our second was underestimating what desperation could drive humans to do. The initial assault went perfectly. We breached the outer hull in 4 places simultaneously, sealed the facility from any escape pods, and cut their communications. Standard protocol, by the book. He shook his head slowly. What we didn't expect was that Hyjin had been preparing. For this day, since she took command. Preparing how? Whispered the young Centauri recruit. She turned every miner into a soldier, every engineer into a tactician, every maintenance worker into a saboteur. Vextalar's voice grew darker. When we breached the hole, we weren't facing panicked civilians. We were facing an organized resistance that had been training in secret for months. The cantina around them seemed to fade as Vextalar's story pulled the recruits deeper into the nightmare of Titan Base. The corridors were narrow, designed for human-sized workers. For their defense, terrible for our assault. Every junction had been turned into a killing field. They'd welded mining equipment into makeshift barriers and positioned industrial lasers as defensive weapons. But it was their use of the mining charges that really showed their tactical thinking. Vextalar continued. Explosions. They were carefully calculated to collapse specific sections, channeling our forces into predetermined kill zones. Hyjin had turned the entire facility into a 3-dimensional maze with herself as the architect. Gorpak's 4 hands gripped his drink tighter. How many did you lose in the first assault? 17 soldiers in the first hour. Not too superior. Firepower or advanced weapons, but to mining equipment and industrial tools wielded by desperate humans who had everything to lose. Vextalar's compound eyes seemed to dim as he remembered. The worst part was watching how they fought. There was a young human named Dong Ho. Couldn't have been more than 19 years old. He was assigned to Corridor 7, a main thoroughfare that connected the living quarters to the processing center. When we tried to advance through his section, he held us off for 3 hours. 3 hours. One human kid against an entire platoon of Coalition Marines. What was he using? Crix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything. Vextalar's mechanical tentacles sparked with agitation. He started with a mining laser, modified to fire in rapid bursts instead of continuous beams. When that overheated, he switched to explosive charges, throwing them like grenades. When those ran out, he used the corridor's artificial gravity controls to slam us against the walls. But the moment that still haunts me was when he ran out of conventional weapons. We thought we had him cornered. My squad leader Vexscorth moved in for the capture. Dong Ho looked at this massive Zephyrian warrior, this professional killer with decades of experience, and he smiled. The recruits held their breath. Then he attacked with his bare hands. Not just punching, he used techniques I'd never seen. Pressure points, joint manipulation, using our own momentum against us. This human kid, this miner, was fighting like he'd studied every alien physiology in the galaxy. Vextalar's voice cracked slightly. He killed Vextalarth with nothing but his hands and a piece of broken metal. Vextalarth, who had survived the Rigel campaign, the Centauri uprising, the siege of Vega Prime, killed by a human teenager. While Dong Ho was holding that corridor, the other humans were evacuating their non-combatants through the mining shafts. Children, elderly, anyone who couldn't fight. They were using the facility's own excavation tunnels as escape routes. We finally broke through Dong Ho's position, but it cost us 8 more soldiers. When we found him, he was unconscious from blood loss, but still breathing. The medic said he should have died an hour earlier from his injuries, but somehow he'd kept fighting. The veteran paused, his mechanical appendages clicking nervously. That's when we learned the real truth about human endurance. They don't just fight until they're dead. They fight until their bodies physically can't continue, and then they fight some more. What happened next? Gorpak asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. We pushed deeper into the facility, taking heavy casualties. At every turn, Hyjin had organized the defense like a military operation. Overlapping fields of fire, planned fallback positions, coordinated counterattacks. She was using mining robots as remote weapons, turning cargo haulers into battering rams, even using the facility's life support system as a weapon. By the time we reached the main processing center, we'd lost 37 soldiers. More than a third of our force, destroyed by civilian miners with improvised weapons. Vextalar's compound eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. That's when I saw her Hajin. She was standing behind a reinforced blast door, watching us through the transparent aluminum viewport. She should have been terrified, defeated, begging for mercy. Instead, she was smiling. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. She pressed her hand against the glass and spoke into the intercom. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I want you to remember this moment," she said. "I want you to tell your people what happens when they threaten human families." Then she pressed a button. Vextalar's mechanical tentacles retracted fully, a defensive gesture the recruits had never seen before. The reactor overload alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the facility. Computer voices announced in multiple languages that core breach was imminent. The entire station was going to explode and we were trapped inside. She killed herself to stop you. Crix's voice was barely audible. That's what we thought. It had maybe 3 minutes before the reactor went. Critical. Enough time to watch our deaths approach, but not enough to escape. Hajin just stood there, watching us through that viewport, smiling like she'd won the greatest victory in human history. Then, with 30 seconds left on the countdown, she spoke again. "The mining shafts are marked with blue lights. You have 20 seconds to decide if you want to live or die with your pride intact." The recruits stared in shock. She gave you a way out. Not us. She gave my surviving soldiers a choice. Follow the blue lights to the emergency escape pods, or stay and die with the facility. Vex Taylor's voice grew hollow. Most of my squad ran. They chose life over honor. I stayed paralyzed by the impossibility of what I was seeing. At the last second, Haijin triggered something else. Emergency blast doors sealed the mining shafts, protecting the escape routes from the explosion. She'd planned it all. The evacuation of her people, the destruction of the facility, even our survival. The explosion took out the entire processing center and 12 of my soldiers who were too slow to reach the escape routes. But Haijin and her people were already gone, evacuated through mining tunnels that led to hidden ships in the asteroid. Field Vex Taylor finished his drink and stood slowly. She didn't just defeat us, she taught us a lesson. Humans don't just fight to win, they fight to send a message. That message was simple. We would rather destroy everything we've built than let you take it from us. The recruits sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. They weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing a species that valued freedom more than life itself. "Sleep well tonight?" Vextalar said as he limped toward the cantina exit. "Tomorrow you'll learn whether you're brave enough to face that kind of determination." The cantina had grown quieter as more patrons left for the night, but the recruits remained glued to their seats. Vextal's stories were like watching a transport crash in slow motion, horrifying but impossible to look away from. The old veteran ordered another drink, his mechanical tentacles clicking against the glass as he gathered his thoughts. "After the Titan base disaster, High Command stripped me of my field commission." Gextalar began, his compound eyes reflecting the flickering neon lights. "They said I was too reckless, too emotional. Maybe they were right. But they still needed experienced officers who understood human tactics." He took a long drink, the purple liquid casting strange shadows on his scarred carapace. 6 months. Later, they gave me a new assignment. Operation Stranglehold. The siege of New Sol Colony on Kepler 4 for 2C. Crix leaned forward nervously. "A siege. It's different from a direct assault." "Different and worse," Vextalar replied. The brass had learned from previous failures. No more direct confrontations with desperate humans. This time, we'd use time as our weapon. Blockade the colony, cut off all supply lines, and wait for starvation to do what our soldiers couldn't. Gorpok's forearms gestured questioningly. "That sounds efficient. What could go wrong with a simple blockade?" Vextalar's laugh was hollow. "Everything, because we still didn't understand what we were dealing with." The veteran's mechanical tentacles traced patterns on the scarred table surface. New Sol Colony was established 23 years before. The war started. 12,000 human settlers on a world that was barely habitable. The atmosphere was breathable but thin. The soil was acidic. The weather patterns were unpredictable. Most species would have abandoned the planet after the first winter, but humans? He shook his head slowly. They turned it into home. The colony leader was a woman named Young. 47 years old, former agricultural scientist from Earth. She'd spent 2 decades turning that hostile world into farmland. Command's intelligence said she was a civilian administrator with no military experience. Vexiller's scarred face twisted. Another massive underestimation. We established the blockade with a fleet of 30 ships. Orbital platforms, fighter squadrons, long-range interceptors. Nothing got in or out of that system without our permission. We cut their supply lines, jammed their communications, and settled in to wait. The recruits hung on every word as Vexteller continued his tale. The first month went according to plan. Surveillance showed the colonists implementing rationing measures. Food distribution became more organized. Non-essential activities were suspended. Normal response to a siege situation. But by the second month, we started seeing things that didn't make sense. Instead of growing weaker, the colonists seemed to be adapting. They were converting ornamental gardens into food production, dismantling furniture to build hydroponic systems, even using recycled waste to create fertilizer. Vextillar's compound eyes dimmed as he remembered. Young organized rationing that would have killed most species within weeks. Adults eating once every 3 days. Children getting priority for all food supplies. Elderly volunteers refusing their rations to make sure the young survived. I watched through surveillance feeds as this transformation happened. A human named Wu Jin, a school teacher, continued holding classes even as he grew thinner each day. When he finally collapsed from hunger during a lesson about Earth's history, he didn't stop teaching, kept talking from the floor, describing the beauty of his homeworld to children who might never see it. The veteran's voice grew softer. The medical team that helped him was led by a woman named Dr. Min Ji. She was operating a hospital with no medical supplies, performing surgery with improvised tools, keeping people alive through sheer determination and knowledge. But it was the way they took care of each other that really shook us. Humans were giving their food to neighbors, sharing blankets during the cold nights, organizing support groups for families who lost members to starvation. Gorpok's voice was barely a whisper. How long did this go on? 73 days. The number came out like a death sentence. 73 days of watching humans endure conditions that would have broken any other species in the galaxy. Vextiller's mechanical appendages retracted slightly, a defensive gesture. On day 73, one of our patrol units found something that still haunts my dreams. A human named Kyun Soo, a former security guard who'd volunteered to protect the colony's emergency food supplies. He'd been dead for 2 days when we found him. He's died at his post from starvation and exhaustion. But his body was still there, still gripping his rifle, still guarding those supplies. Even in death he was, protecting his people. The cantina seemed to grow colder as Vextiller's words sank in. That's when our own troops started having problems. Morale was collapsing. Soldiers were refusing to watch the surveillance feeds. Some were asking to be transferred to other assignments. Watching humans slowly starve while refusing to surrender was destroying our psychological readiness. I started getting reports from ship commanders about crew members having nightmares, about arguments breaking out over whether the siege was necessary, about young soldiers crying after their shifts. Monitoring the colony. Vextaylor took another drink, his throat working as he swallowed. By day 80, High Command was pressuring me for results. The blockade was costing enormous resources, and the effect on our troops was becoming a bigger problem than the colony itself. That's when I made the decision to breach the walls. Not because we wanted to fight, but because watching humans endure the impossible was making our own soldiers question everything they believed about war. The veteran's compound eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. I led the assault personally. After 3 months of siege, we expected to find broken survivors begging for mercy. Maybe a few hundred humans left alive, too weak to resist. Instead, we found them organized, armed, and ready to fight. The words hung in the air like smoke. Saw Young met us at the colony's main gate. She'd lost maybe 40 pounds. Her clothes hung on her like rags. Her face was gaunt from months of starvation. She looked like a skeleton wrapped in determination. Her eyes, ... Vextiller's voice cracked. Her eyes burned with unbroken will. She looked at me, at my assault force, at our weapons and armor, and she smiled. "Welcome to New Sol," she said. "We've been expecting you." Behind her stood 3,000 colonists. Men, women, teenagers, elderly, all armed with improvised weapons, all organized into defensive positions, all ready to die rather than surrender their home. Vextilor's mechanical tentacles clicked nervously. That's when I realized the truth. Siege hadn't weakened them. It had made them stronger, united them, turned them into something more dangerous than any army. We had superior numbers, better weapons, professional training, but they had something we couldn't understand or counter. They had the absolute certainty that they were fighting for their families, their homes, their right to exist. The battle lasted 6 hours. We took the colony, technically, but it cost us 200 soldiers against civilians armed with mining tools and desperation. The veteran stood slowly, his damaged body showing every battle scar. In the end, we had to withdraw. Not because we couldn't hold the colony, but because our own troops were beginning to break down. Watching humans endure 3 months of starvation and then fight like demons was destroying our morale faster than any military defeat. High Command called it a tactical withdrawal. I called it what it was, a retreat from an enemy we couldn't understand and couldn't defeat. Vextilor limped toward the cantina exit, pausing at the door. So Young's final words as we pulled out still echo in my mind. She said, "Tell your leaders that humans remember kindness, but we never forget cruelty. We choose wisely." The recruits sat in stunned silence as the implications of the story sank in. They weren't just facing warriors or soldiers, they were facing an entire species that would endure any hardship, survive any catastrophe, and fight any enemy to protect what they loved. "Get some sleep," Vextiller said quietly. "Tomorrow, you'll learn whether you have the stomach to face that kind of determination, and whether you'll be able to live with yourselves afterward." Outside the cantina, the stars seemed dim and cold, and somewhere among them, humanity endured with the patient strength of worlds themselves. The recruits had stopped drinking entirely, their glasses forgotten as Vex Taylor's tales grew darker with each telling. The old veteran's mechanical tentacles twitched constantly now, a nervous habit he'd developed after too many battles. He stared into his drink for a long moment before continuing. "After New Sol, High Command decided I was cursed, Vextillar," began, his voice carrying a tremor that hadn't been there before. "3 major failures," they said. Maybe I was losing my edge. So they gave me what they thought was an easy assignment. Reconnaissance patrol on Proxima Centauri B. Crix shifted uncomfortably. Reconnaissance sounds simple enough. That's what I thought. Vex Taylor's compound eyes reflected the cantina's dim lighting. Just a standard survey mission. Map the terrain. Identify resources. Check for human settlements. Command said the planet was mostly uninhabited jungle. Maybe a few research stations scattered around. Nothing we couldn't handle. He took a shaky drink, the purple liquid sloshing in his trembling grasp. They assigned me a fresh squad. 11 elite soldiers from different species, all volunteers who wanted to serve under the famous Vextillar. Kids who thought my reputation was impressive instead of cursed. Gorpak leaned forward. "What was the terrain like?" "Proxima B was a green hell," Vextillar replied, his mechanical tentacles clicking nervously. "Dense jungle that stretched from horizon to horizon. Trees taller than coalition battleships, with canopies so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. Air was humid and thick, filled with sounds from creatures we'd never seen before. But it was beautiful too, in a dangerous way. Bioluminescent plants that glowed in the perpetual twilight. Streams of crystal clear water that tasted better than anything from our supply tanks. It felt like paradise, if you could ignore the feeling that something was watching you. The veteran's scarred face twisted as he remembered. We'd been on patrol for 2 days when we made contact. Small human research station. Maybe 20 people studying the local ecosystem. Standard protocol said we should observe and report. Back. Simple. My squad leader, Commander Vector, was a Regillian with 20 years of combat experience. He'd survived the siege of Vega, the Centauri uprising, even the nightmare at Wolf 359, tough as neutronium and twice as stubborn. Vextelaire's voice grew quieter. Vector decided we should get closer, maybe gather some intelligence on human research capabilities. So we moved through the jungle like ghosts, using all our training and superior senses to approach undetected. That's when we met Jinwoo. The name came out like a curse, and the recruits instinctively leaned back. Sergeant Jinwoo Park, Earth's Defense Force, stationed at Research Station Alpha 7, 34 years old. Married 2 daughters back on Earth. His file said he was a communications specialist, not a combat soldier. Just another researcher with basic military training. Vextelaire's mechanical appendages retracted fully. The first sign something was wrong came when our point scout, a Centauri named Velkos, just vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. No scream, no struggle, no trace. Like the jungle had swallowed him whole. Vector called for a perimeter sweep, standard procedure when you lose contact with a squad member. We spread out in a search pattern, using our enhanced senses to track any sign of Velkos. The veteran's compound eyes grew distant. That's when Jinwoo's voice came over our communications channel. Calm, professional, speaking perfect coalition standard. "You're looking for your friend," he said. "He's alive. For now." Gorpak S. For hands gripped his drink tighter. "He'd captured one of your soldiers. Captured, disabled, whatever you want to call it." But the message was clear. They knew we were there. They had one of ours, and they were in control of the situation. Vextalar took another drink, his throat working as he swallowed. Vector tried to establish communication protocols, but Jinwoo cut him off. "This is our home now," he said. "You're trespassing. Leave now, and we'll return your friend unharmed. Stay, and you'll learn why humans survived Earth's predators for millions of years." Of course, Vector refused. 12 elite coalition soldiers weren't going to be intimidated by a handful of human researchers. He ordered us to advance and secure the research station. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was our first mistake. The second was thinking we were hunting them. For the next 3 days, Jinwoo and his team turned that jungle into our personal nightmare. They didn't just fight us, they hunted us like we were prey animals. Vextalar's mechanical tentacles clicked rapidly, betraying his agitation. The human team was only for people. Jinwoo, a sniper named Yeonesio, a tracker called Hyunsu, and a combat engineer named Sangmin. For humans against 12 trained soldiers, and somehow we were the ones running scared. They used tactics we'd never encountered before. Yeonesio would wound one of us, never a killing shot, then wait for the rescue attempt before striking again. She turned our own squad loyalty into a weapon against us. I watched her put a plasma bolt through Sergeant Korth's shoulder from 800 meters away. When we moved to extract him, she put another shot inches from Corporal Zex's head. Not trying to kill, just letting us know she could have. The recruits sat in horrified silence as Vextalar continued. But it was their coordination that really terrified us. No radio chatter that we could intercept, no visible signals, yet they moved like parts of a single organism. Hyunsu would appear from nowhere, engage us briefly with small arms fire, then vanish back into the jungle before we could respond. Then Sangmin would hit us from a completely different angle with improvised explosives. Tree branches rigged to fall across our path, pit traps covered with jungle debris. Even our own equipment turned into booby traps when we weren't watching. Vextalar's compound eyes reflected something that might have been terror. The worst part was that they were always watching. Always there, just at the edge of our perception. We'd catch glimpses of movement in the canopy, hear sounds that might have been footsteps or might have been whined through the leaves. By the second day, we were jumping at shadows. Every sound in that jungle became a potential threat. Birds calling in the canopy might be Yanesio repositioning for another shot. Water dripping from leaves might be Hyansu moving through the undergrowth. The tar started showing signs of psychological breakdown on day 2. This veteran commander who'd faced down entire fleets was reduced to talking to himself constantly. Checking his weapon, spinning around at every minor sound, the veteran's voice cracked slightly. On the 3rd day, Jinwoo's voice came over the come again. "Your commander is having a conversation with a tree stump," he said. "2 of your soldiers are crying. One is praying to gods that aren't listening. This is what fear looks like." That's when I realized what they were doing. This wasn't combat. It was psychological warfare. They were breaking us down mentally before they moved in for the kill. Vex Taylor finished his drink with shaking appendages. Jinwoo offered us one final chance. "Walk to the extraction point," he said. "Your friend is there, alive and unharmed. Take him and leave. But if we see coalition forces in this system again, we won't be so generous." Dektar wanted to fight. Even broken and terrified, he wanted to complete the mission. But the rest of us... Staler's voice trailed off. We were done. Finished. These 4 humans had destroyed our unit without killing a single soldier, called for emergency extraction, and made our way to the pickup point. Belkos was there, unconscious but alive, with a note pinned to his uniform, "Professional courtesy. Don't make us kill you next time." The old veteran stood slowly, his damaged body creaking. As our transport lifted off, Jinwoo's voice followed us on the com channel one last time. "Tell your friends this is what happens when you enter our woods. Earth remembers its children, and we remember how to hunt." Vextalar limped toward the cantina exit, his final words barely audible over the background noise. 4 humans turned 12 elite soldiers into broken, terrified wrecks in 72 hours. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through patience, coordination, and an understanding of fear that went deeper than any military training. The recruits sat in stunned silence, suddenly aware that they weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing apex predators who had spent millions of years learning how to hunt in packs. And tomorrow, they might find themselves as prey in humanity's ancient game of survival. The cantina had nearly emptied by now, leaving only the recruits and a few scattered patrons nursing their drinks in the shadows. Vexteller sat motionless for several minutes, his compound eyes staring into the depths of his glass as if searching for answers that would never come. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a soul crushed by impossible memories. "There's one more story," he said quietly, his mechanical tentacles retracting until they were barely visible. "The one that ended the war, the one that taught the coalition the true meaning of fear." The recruits, already pale from the previous tales, leaned forward despite their growing dread. They knew this final story would be the worst, but they couldn't stop themselves from listening. 2 years after Proxima Centauri High Command had had enough, Vextalar began, his scarred face reflecting the cantina's flickering lights. Every engagement with humans had been a disaster. Every victory had cost more than defeat. The brass decided it was time for overwhelming force. He took a shaky drink, the purple liquid casting strange shadows across his features. They assembled. The largest battle fleet in coalition history. 300 ships, 50,000 soldiers, enough firepower to glass an entire planet. Operation Final Strike. We were going to end human resistance once and for all. Crix's voice was barely a whisper. What was the target? Europa Station, a mining and research facility orbiting Jupiter. 5,000 human civilians, maybe 100 security personnel. It should have been a massacre. Vex Taylor's laugh was hollow and broken. High Command wanted to make an example, show the galaxy what happened to species that defied the coalition. The veteran's mechanical appendages clicked nervously as he continued. The station commander was a human named Jae Seung. 49 years old, former naval officer turned civilian administrator. His file said he'd retired from military service. To spend more time with his family? Gorpak asked, though his voice suggested he already dreaded the answer. His wife worked as a hydroponics engineer on the station. His daughter, the Jinn, was 12 years old. They'd made Europa Station their home, along with 5,000 other humans who just wanted to live their lives in peace. Vextalar's compound eyes dimmed as he remembered.
Ow.
When our battle fleet arrived, we expected immediate surrender. The station had no military vessels, no defensive platforms, no chance of survival against our overwhelming force. Instead, Jae-soon sent a message on all frequencies. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "You wanted to see what humans are capable of?" he said. "Watch and learn." The recruits felt a chill run through them as Vextalar's voice grew hollow. We gave them 1 hour to evacuate non-combatants and surrender. Standard procedure before orbital bombardment. What we got instead was a masterclass in human ingenuity and desperation. The station should have been defenseless. It was a civilian facility with mining equipment and research labs. But in that 1 hour, they turned it into something else entirely. Vextalar's scarred face twisted with remembered horror. A human engineer named Myung had rewired the entire power grid. When our boarding parties breached the outer hull, they walked into sections where the very air was electrified. Corridors became death traps that could fry a soldier in full combat armor. But that was just the beginning. The security chief, a man named Sung-ho, had found ways to weaponize systems we'd never considered threats. Artificial gravity became a weapon, creating crushing zones that could flatten a Regian in seconds, or zero-G kill boxes where our soldiers floated helplessly while humans attacked from all angles. The veteran took another drink, his appendages trembling. They turned everything into a weapon. Mining lasers became defensive turrets. Cargo haulers became battering rams. Even the life support system was turned against us, flooding sections with toxic gases or vacuum conditions, but it was their coordination that really showed us what we were facing. 5,000 civilians organized like a military unit. Teachers became tacticians. Doctors became combat medics. Children became messengers running through maintenance shafts that our soldiers couldn't navigate. Vextalar's voice cracked as he continued. The worst part was watching them sacrifice themselves for each other. A maintenance worker named Jun-ho held a critical junction alone for 4 hours, giving his life so others could reach defensive positions. Teacher named Hae-rin used herself as bait to lure our soldiers into a trap that saved 50 children. We were losing soldiers by the hundreds. Not to professional military forces, but to desperate humans with improvised weapons. An absolute determination to protect their families. The cantina seemed to grow colder as Vextalar's tale reached its climax. On the 3rd day of fighting, I was leading an assault team toward the station's command center. We'd taken horrific casualties, but we were finally making progress. That's when I saw her. His compound eyes focused on something beyond the cantina. Walls. The Jin Jae-sung's 12-year-old daughter. She was standing behind a damaged viewport, watching our assault team approach through the corridor. She should have been terrified, should have been crying, begging for mercy, hiding with the other children. Instead, she pressed her small hand against the reinforced glass and looked directly at me. Vextalar's voice became barely audible. Her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with rage. Pure, concentrated hatred for what we'd done to her home, her family, her people. She mouthed words that our translation software picked up immediately. "You picked the wrong species to mess with." The recruits sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. That's when I understood what we were really fighting. It's not just soldiers or even desperate civilians. We were fighting an entire species that would teach their children to hate us with such intensity that a 12-year-old girl could look at an armed alien warrior and promise vengeance. Vextalar stood slowly, his damaged body showing every battle scar earned over decades of warfare. We won that battle, technically. Took the station after 7 days of fighting. But it cost us 35,000 casualties. 70% of our assault force destroyed by mining equipment and human determination. Command called it a victory, but everyone knew the truth. We'd revealed something about humans that changed the entire war. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to ensure that we would remember the cost of aggression for generations to come. The veteran limped toward the cantina exit, his mechanical appendages clicking against the floor. 3 days after Europa Station, the coalition sued for peace. Not because we couldn't win, but because we finally understood what winning would require. He paused at the door, his scarred face reflecting the neon lights one last time. We would have had to kill every human in the galaxy, every man, woman, and child. Because they'd proven that surrender wasn't in their vocabulary. They would fight to the last breath, turn every home into a fortress, teach their children to carry on the war even if every adult died. The peace treaty wasn't signed because we were merciful. It was signed because we were terrified. Terrified. Of a species that could turn a 12-year-old girl into a promise of vengeance. Terrified of what they might become if we pushed them to the absolute edge of extinction. Vex Talar final words echoed through the now silent cantina. Sleep well. Tonight, younglings. Tomorrow you learn whether you're brave enough to face Earth's children or wise enough to pray you never have to. Because humans don't just fight wars. They win them by making their enemies afraid to ever fight them again. The recruits sat in stunned silence as the old veteran disappeared into the station's corridors. Around them, the cantina's lights seemed dimmer, the air colder. Outside the viewports, the stars stretched endlessly into the void. And somewhere among them, humanity waited with the patient. Terrible resolve of a species that had survived everything the universe could throw at them. They were no longer eager. Young soldiers dreaming of glory, they were terrified children who had just learned that the monsters in their nightmares were real. And tomorrow, they might have to face them in battle. The war might be over, but the fear would last forever. Asterisk, the E and D asterisk.